David had heard the stories all his life. He had grown up in São Bento, hearing the old-timers speak of the house on the hill whenever there was a quiet moment. At first, he had dismissed it all as superstition, the ramblings of people too afraid to look beyond the obvious. But as he grew older, curiosity gnawed at him. Why had the house been abandoned? What had really happened to Charles Montclair? And why did it seem like the people who spoke of it the most always seemed off? It wasn't until David's late 20s that he finally made up his mind. He was no longer going to be intimidated by the stories and whispers. He was going to find out what was really happening at that house. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the horizon, David set out for the hill. The air was thick with humidity, and the streets of São Bento were unusually quiet. It felt as though the entire town was holding its breath, watching him as he walked toward his destination. The path that led up the hill was overgrown with weeds, the once pristine cobblestones now hidden beneath layers of moss and creeping ivy. The trees along the path were gnarled, their twisted branches reaching toward him as if to warn him, to stop him before it was too late. But David pressed on. When he finally reached the top, he stood before the house. It was even more imposing than he had imagined. The building seemed to sag under the weight of time, its walls cracked and worn. The windows, once bright and clear, were now opaque, covered in a layer of grime and dust. The front door, however, was slightly ajar, as if inviting him in. He hesitated for a moment, feeling a chill creep down his spine, but then he pushed the door open. The inside of the house was just as he had expected, dusty, decaying, and eerily silent. The air smelled of rot, like something long forgotten. He stepped cautiously into the foyer, his footfalls echoing in the empty space. The grand staircase loomed ahead of him, its banister crooked and broken, and the wallpaper peeling off the walls in long strips. David's heart pounded in his chest, but he pressed on. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to turn back now. As he moved deeper into the house, he noticed strange markings on the walls. Symbols, like those of an ancient ritual, were etched into the surface, some scratched hastily, others carefully carved as if with great care. He ran his fingers along one of the symbols and felt a sudden jolt of electricity course through him. He recoiled, but it was too late. The atmosphere in the house shifted. A heavy presence, something ancient and powerful, seemed to stir. The air grew colder, and a low hum began to vibrate through the walls, reverberating in his chest. David's skin prickled with unease, but he couldn't stop now. He had to keep going. He ascended the staircase slowly, each step creaking under his weight. At the top of the stairs there was a long hallway, and at the end of it a door. The door that led to the room where Charles Montclair had spent his final days. The room that no one had dared enter since his disappearance. David reached for the doorknob, but before his fingers could touch it, he heard a noisier, soft, almost imperceptible whisper coming from the other side of the door. It was a voice that sounded desperate. "Help me." David froze. His blood ran cold. The voice was faint, but it was there, unmistakable. It was a voice that pleaded for something, for release, for freedom. But from what? He hesitated. Should he open the door? Should he turn back? But before he could make up his mind, the door creaked open on its own, as if it had been waiting for him. Inside, the room was pitch black. David's eyes slowly adjusted, and he could just make out the faint outline of an old desk covered in dust and a large, ornate mirror on the far wall. The mirror was cracked, its glass shattered in places, but it still reflected something he couldn't quite understand. The room smelled strange, like wet earth and metal. He stepped inside, and as soon as he did, the door slammed shut behind him with a deafening bang. David spun around, heart racing, but the door was solid, unyielding. There was no escape now. Suddenly, the mirror began to change. The reflection inside it distorted, warping into something unnatural. At first it was just a blur, a dark shape that twisted and writhed. But then a face appeared. A face he recognized: Charles Montclair, his eyes wide with terror, his mouth open in a silent scream. And then, just as suddenly, the face was gone. David stumbled back, his breath quickening. He felt as though he were being watched, no, not just watched, but observed. Something was waiting for him in the shadows, something ancient and hungry. The ground beneath his feet began to tremble, and a low growl like that of an animal echoed through the room. The walls seemed to close in on him, the space shrinking, and the whisper returned, louder this time, more urgent. "Leave, leave, before it's too late." David's pulse raced as he scrambled toward the door, but the handle wouldn't turn. Panic surged through him as the temperature in the room plummeted, his breath visible in the freezing air. And then, through the darkness, he heard a new sound: footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching from behind. He spun around but saw nothing, except for the reflection in the mirror. It wasn't his own face staring back at him anymore. No, it was something else, something far more sinister. David's heart stopped. The thing in the mirror smiled.